Hello and welcome to the next in our IB psychology series, this time on cognitive psychology, how to use theories of memory. So here we are, moving on to have a look at the first slide. Remember, now you're not going to learn anything very new, I don't think, but you may learn how to structure the course to make the memory theories more coherent and, of course, to answer the ever-present learning outcomes. Here I have reordered the learning outcomes associated with cognitive psychology and memory a little bit and colour-coded them. And you'll see why in a moment, but it's a structure that does help you to organise your course, perhaps rather more coherently than you may have done before, to teach memory. It's always nice to start with a discussion point when you're teaching memory, and I really like what I always used to call the melting clocks picture till I realised what its real title was. It doesn't really matter if you're not an art historian and you can't analyse this yourself. Get the kids to brainstorm what they think about it, what it's saying perhaps about memory, and how memory maybe changes as it persists, but let them tell you what they think it's about. And it's a good introduction to what is essentially in cognitive psychology a discussion about the lack of reliability of memory. This is what the main focus is. So this is actually how I structure it. I start at the point of the reliability of memory, and then split this into three different sections. Memory is filtered, memory is reconstructed, and the neuroanatomy of the brain also affects memory. And then I break this down even further. The filtering, memory is filtered through attention, and memory is filtered culturally or socially. It's reconstructed via emotion or suggestion. And of course, neuroanatomy refers to the biology of the brain, and the memory is affected by brain structure and brain processes. So if we look first at attention and memory. So if we're looking at attention and memory, we can look at how attention affects the multi-store memory, the working memory model, and the levels of processing theory or model. A model, after all, is just a visual representation of a theory. So the multi-store memory is a linear model, and from sensory memory to short-term memory involves attention. And if we look here, we can see the multi-store model of memory, and we can see that it is attention that gets memory from the sensory register into the short-term memory. The multi-store memory focuses very much on dual processing and multitasking. So the working memory model, here we have the working memory model. It is a model just of short-term memory. Attention brings in information from the sensory memory, but look how it's split into the phonological loop that controls our listening and speaking, and the visual spatial sketch pad that is predominantly visual. This is why I can talk and also watch this PowerPoint at the same time. If somebody came in and started demanding my auditory attention or access to my phonological store, then I'd be in real trouble. And the levels of processing theory as well, put forward by Craik and Lockhart in 1972 and followed up by Craik and Tulving some years afterwards. This says it's not the fact of attention, but it's the type of attention that allows information to proceed from the short-term memory and into the long-term memory. If words or knowledge are processed structurally or phonemically, this basically means that if you have a word to remember, you might be asked, does it begin with a capital letter, or does it rhyme with drain or rain? You're not so likely to remember it if you're answering those sorts of questions, they found, as if you were asked to use the word yourself in a sentence. Then you're processing it by its meaning semantically, and lo and behold, you are much more likely to remember it, and it gets moved on to long-term memory. Now, the question associated with this that is most common is evaluate two models or theories of one cognitive process with reference to research studies. And to be honest, it's very easy to evaluate multi-store memory and working memory just by comparing them. One is linear and static, however, multi-stores do exist almost certainly. One looks at dual processing and is more dynamic, but it is only a model of short-term memory. And you can use the study of KF by Shallis and Warrington to actually both critique the multi-store memory model and to support the working memory model. Patient KF had a horrible motorcycle accident and lost a lot of his short-term memory, but he could still create and hold memories in his long-term memory because he did not lose his visual short-term memory. He could still process things visually. So this is a lot of support for the working memory model, and it tends to contradict the somewhat linear view and static view of the multi-store memory model. Working memory model, by the way, is really still used, and there are still a lot of research done that takes the working memory model as the basis, as its springboard for further research. If you want to teach your students more about the working memory model and multi-store memory model and have them learn a bit about procedural and episodic memory as well, we have a game for you from Tutor to You called Memory on the Move. Now, the link to this game will be shared on the Tutor to You site by Joseph, but basically the aim of the activity is for students to take part in 7 mini memory experiments and work out the connections to the multi-store memory and working memory model. So you set up your classroom table so you have 7 testing stations with 7 different activities. And here's an example of one instruction for activity 6, an example of a student response sheet. And basically how it works, one student takes on the role of the experimenter, one on each 7 testing stations, and the other students rotate through the different experiments every 3 minutes until they have completed all 7. And then the students swap roles. Once everyone has completed the activity, they complete the questions related to memory. So this is a nice activity, and it will take you at least 50 minutes, maybe a 1-hour lesson to get everybody in your class to complete it, of course, depending on how large your class is. Right. So it covers things like sensory memory, the capacity of short-term memory, the working memory model, and episodic and procedural memory. So that was the first section. That was the attention section. Memory varies according to attention. Now, also, memory varies according to cultural and social factors. And we are all aware that schema fit theory comes out of cultural and social experience. But of course, learning styles and autobiographical memory are also affected culturally. And we'll look at that a little bit more in a moment, but let's just show you another game that is very, very useful for teaching your students about schema theory. It leads into Brewer and Trahan's research, but first of all, you ask the students to go to your office and collect something from your desk, and you can send several of them. And in your office, you have a couple of uncharacteristic things. There's a bottle of shampoo here on the desk, and there's a frying pan up on the shelf. You can even put the frying pan nearer to your desk if you want to, just so it's more in the student's line of vision when they go and collect things for you. So you ask the students to go. I'm not going to do this. This is a game we can run if we're doing an online seminar. And they go into your office to pick up a leaflet or textbook. And then when they come out, you ask them to draw a diagram of your desk and the surrounding shelves in groups. So they're drawing, which they quite like doing. And then you collect in the diagrams and you have a look at them. And you ask them why they didn't remember the frying pan and the bottle of shampoo. And they won't believe you that they were ever there. You'll have to show them this photo of your office or any other office. I'm sure mine doesn't look quite as tidy as this, in order to convince them, because these 2 items were, of course, not part of the office schema. And this is a wonderful segue, of course, into Bartlett's research. And of course, it relates directly to Brewer and Trains. Things that aren't part of the schema are not necessarily remembered. Or we create our own schemas and remember them wrongly. So this is another quite well-known activity. Give your students a minute to memorize the picture of the clock or the nice pocket watch, and then give them 3 minutes to draw the picture as accurately as possible. And of course, this is what they will come up with. As somebody pointed out, there is actually a problem here because 12 has been drawn as 21. That shouldn't have happened. But what always happens is the students will draw 4, not as 4 ones, but as IV in the traditional Roman numerals. And then finally, for schema theory, give them a picture to look at and ask them to write down all of the words that come to their mind when they see this image. Go back to this when you're wanting to teach stereotyping, because this is a very good introduction and a lead from schema theory into stereotyping. And you'll be surprised what very quickly people come up with very similar descriptions of the picture. All right, moving on. Schema theory, of course, is highly useful for evaluate schema theory with reference to research studies or discuss how social or cultural factors affect one cognitive process. So here really is a graphic that shows you how to use both schema theory and social and or cultural factors. Any essay question you get on an IB paper will allow students to choose social or cultural factors, and it will have the and or split. Encourage them to choose both because, to be honest, distinguishing between them is agreed by examiners and teachers alike to be a very difficult thing to do. So, to answer the evaluate schema theory or discuss how social or cultural factors affect one cognitive process, they can happily use any of these studies here and then hold on to this graphic, because when you are teaching your options, schemas affect abnormal psychology option and health option with eating disorders. And also, if you look at Ellis and Beck's explanation for depression, they both use the idea of schemas, faulty cognitive thinking or faulty cognitive schemas. So it's worthwhile holding on to the idea of schemas. Evaluations of schema theory, you can point at other things as well as schema that actually affects memory. You can point at the vagueness of schema, how it's never really been scientifically tested, and of course the failure to locate anything that creates a schema framework anywhere in the brain. Right, so that covers now the filtering. Now let's look at the reconstructive part, and we have emotion and memory. Flashbulb memory, weapons focus, repression. And to flip through these really quickly, these are the 2 learning outcomes or essay questions that could be covered by this. Flashbulb memory, for essay number 1, you could use Brown and Kulik and Yule and Kutzel, who we look at on the next page, to argue for the reliability of memory, and you can use all the others to argue for the unreliability in many different ways. And there's a nice reference here to a Psychology Today blog. I've included Freud here because I think his argument about severely damaging emotional memories being repressed in the subconscious and only being brought up in dreams where they need decoding or through hypnosis, it sets the scene very, very nicely for false memories, which is what we'll look at in a moment. So I think it's useful for students to look at that. And this link here down the bottom is a very good way for you to introduce it to them. And of course, we have weapons focus here as well. Moving on, the reconstructive nature of memory, we also have suggestion and memory, eyewitness testimony and false memory. Eyewitness testimony, Loftus and Palmer, and Yule and Kutzel, who argued against it. To what extent is one cognitive process reliable? And false memory, Loftus again, Loftus and Pickerel. Loftus again. There is some recent research that questions false memory that I haven't actually included on this slide, but it's really worth, certainly with the first Loftus piece of research, unpicking some of the statistics, it seems, although it was used as evidence for false memory, there were actually a lot of people who did not fall for the false memory trick. And finally, biology and memory. Brain structure and brain processes, of course, are completely linked. If there's a faulty brain structure, the brain processes won't be all that great. And if the brain processes are beginning to break down, like in the early stages of Alzheimer's when acetylcholine take-up is affected, it's not long before the brain structure follows with the nerve damage and the neurons dying. And this can be used to answer 2 learning outcomes, explain how biological factors may affect one cognitive process. You have the medial temporal lobe damage, HM, Corkins research, Clive Waring-Bigler's research, Alzheimer's studies by Swinton Black. And you can also use it with reference to relevant research studies. To what extent is one cognitive process reliable? And don't forget the neurotransmitter malfunction and cortisol and memory as well. You've got a lot of overlap here. If you use cortisol for memory, you can also use cortisol for stress and for depression as well. You can use cortisol for short answer questions on how a hormone affects human behavior. So it's well worthwhile learning perhaps Ackerman, which we have on the Tutor to Review Key Studies outline, or even Newcomer et al. So here is the overview, starting from memory reliability, moving through the 3 main structures onto empirical evidence for them. And finally, here are the final 2 IB psychology webinars, possibly for this year, though we may fit another one in December. The upcoming IB webinars on social psychology, Thursday the 10th of November, and quality answers for qualitative methods papers on Wednesday the 16th of November. And finally, please follow us on Twitter, join the Facebook community, and don't forget to sign up for future webinars. Thank you for listening.